Move the motion.
I move this motion on behalf of Sinn Féin. I think I have 20 minutes. Yeah, thank you. So I want to welcome the fact that the government are not opposing this motion. But of course, it would be much better if you were actually supporting it. And it would be even better, Minister, if you actually put some meaningful supports in place for people with disabilities. We're here today because the budget that was announced last week condemns people with disabilities and their households to poverty, and that is a fact, and if you talk to them, that's what they will tell you. This government shows its true colours, nobody else forcing its hand, and against all expert policy advice, you have chosen to cut the cost of disability supports to the value of over €1,000 per person this year, and on top of this, you have decided that it is not worthwhile to keep the real value of disability allowance in line with inflation. It seems like you forget, Minister, people with disabilities shop in the same shops that you and me shop in. You know, the prices go up the same as they have gone up for us. The only difference is that when they go back to their bank account, there is no money there to meet the rising cost of living. Disability allowance, modest as it is, will have less purchasing power now than it did 5 years ago. And all of this happening while there is a surplus in the order of billions. Minister, the fuel allowance, which we know so many households with disabled members rely on, has received half of the increase that would have been needed just to keep up with inflation, and it's nowhere near its real value, the real value that it was in 2020. And this is one of the cruellest budgets that we have seen in a long time, and it has rightfully been dubbed by Social Justice Ireland as a recipe for austerity. Profiteering, we know, is at the heart of the energy industry. It has never been worse in the history of the state, and now is the time that the state should step in with a cost of living package. But it's make do and mend for disabled people, and an endless tap of cash turned on for landlords and for developers. People with disabilities have, under successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments, been forced to cede their independence, been forced to become more and more dependent on their families for support, being forced to infantilise themselves because they simply cannot live an independent life. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have made it as difficult as possible for disabled people to maintain the financial independence necessary to live in dignity, and this budget, your budget, will make it worse. Ordinary people, disability rights activists, the people who are here in the gallery watching this debate know that it doesn't have to be this way. They saw the budget. They're confounded at how the government could withhold such crucial supports while narrowing the fiscal base and granting tax breaks to property developers. Minister, we needed to see energy credits. We needed to see a significant lump sum payment. We needed to see an increase to disability allowance and other disability payments, as well as an increase in the fuel allowance, a minimum in advance of winter. This evening, we needed to see an increase to disability allowance and other disability payments, as well as an increase in the fuel allowance, a minimum in advance of winter. This evening, I met with Kieran and Padraig. You might know Padraig, he was recently on Prime Time. They were meeting with my colleague, Dr. Pearse Doherty. Both men are disabled campaigners, but they shouldn't have to be. I'd say disabled people are sick and tired of having to beg for every little bit from government. I'd say they're sick and tired of having to tell able-bodied decision makers and policy makers over and over again about the reality of living as a disabled person in this state. And Minister, it's not fair, it's not right, and the government had choices. Disabled people like Padraig who are working face barriers, they face a cliff edge, they face fearing getting a promotion in work in case they are taken above the income limits for any supports. Imagine that, Minister. Imagine being afraid of getting a promotion. Minister, we have a long way to go before people with disabilities are respected and are supported to live a full life. As has often been said in here many times, they are not disabled, they are disabled by society. They deserve supports.
Deputy Morgan.
Minister, I have to say I'm really disappointed that we're here dealing with this issue today. Like, we have recently had the government publish the National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People, and obviously it spoke about a human rights ethos and the fact that disabled people would have certain things as of a right. And in fairness, a number of the advocacy organisations, and we're going to have Rehab, DFI, the IWA, all the constituent parts of the Disability Federation of Ireland, will have representatives here. And the one thing that they said was, at least last year, even if it was one-off payments, it was the recognition of the cost of disability. Now, we've had multiple reports. We can all go back to the Indicon report back in 2021. And again, the cost of disability they found to be, on average, between 9,482 and 11,734. We've seen reports where this number is vastly increased on that. We've all spoken to people. We know the anecdotal stories. I can speak about the man in my constituency. And he speaks about how he can get on in life fine, but he requires orthopedic footwear. I wouldn't even like to call out the figure that he has to pay for that, with no element of support whatsoever. I'm going to thank the Disability Federation of Ireland, and I'm just going to go through a couple of short quotes, because this is the reality for these people. I think we can say that the Sinn Féin have literally put a very straightforward proposal, and I assume, I would like to think, that the government are not only not opposing this, but they will actually support. They will see the wrong that has been done onto those with disability who have a huge level of costs and huge difficulties that we can't even imagine. And I would like to think we would look at meeting them halfway. And we really need to look at a lump sum payment to those with disabilities. We need to look at a cost of disability payment. We need to look at least €20 increase in relation to disability-related social welfare payments. That is just a start. But anyway, we are more reliant than ever on our families, and our independence is being eroded more and more. This is not because of our disability. This is because we need to address the cost of living and the cost of living with a disability. I am receiving a disability payment and the household benefit package. The money received from both these payments is inadequate. I have to attend the food bank weekly, and apart from it being demoralising, it's a necessity to survive. Simply, the word saving does not apply to me, as I simply have nothing left over. I know the cold, long winter nights are only around the corner, and it scares me to think about it. I'm not looking to be a millionaire. I'm looking for security, home, heat, food, family, and not to fight for every basic thing. Minister, in the short period that I have left, I am also going to ask you to look at the wage subsidy scheme, because you had announced a €120 increase in it. But we know that when employers employ a greater number, they used to get paid on the basis of a percentage increase, but you've put it in at a lump sum. And rather than a 120, in certain cases, when we're talking a 3 to 6, we're talking it's only a 57-cent increase, or when we're talking about 12 to 16 employees, only a 21-cent increase. This has been brought to my attention. It needs to be dealt with. I will provide the information to you later, but I think it's something that needs to be dealt with.
Minister, people across the state, I don't have to tell you this, are struggling with the cost of living crisis. The cost of the weekly shop, the cost of utilities, the cost of rent, the cost of fuel are all rising, with little to no support offered in the most recent budget to alleviate some of these pressures on people. For those with a disability, they have these increases to contend with, along with the additional financial cost of living with a disability. The 2021 Indicon report estimated the average cost of living with a disability between $9,500 to almost $12,000 per year. The previous cost of disability package that included a €400 lump sum payment, a €12 increase in disability allowance and 250 energy credit have now been stripped away. Even with these offerings, those living with a disability struggled with their cost. To quote one of our citizens who lives with a disability, "I cannot afford medication the doctor says I need, or drag up blood tests as long as I can." In 21st century Ireland, to hear this, it's an absolute disgrace. People are already facing a challenge, a risk in their health because of the financial circumstances. In September, in advance of the budget, I had the pleasure of hosting the rehab group at Leinster House. Those who spoke on the day were mainly rehab service users and National Learning Network users, who highlighted the numerous financial challenges faced by those with a disability. Their pre-budget briefing contained quotes from services users. They included comments such as, "My family buy my clothes," I have enough to buy the essentials, but an emergency comes, I have nothing, absolutely nothing. I had to move back home now because I couldn't afford to keep paying high rent. So those with a disability are already suffering financial hardships. The 10 years disability allowance increase in last week's budget will not alleviate any of the financial suffering for those people with a disability. This increase doesn't keep in place with inflation. Even with the cost of disability measures, 2024 figures show that 1 in 4 recipients remain in poverty. And if you get 10 euros increase and you're a council tenant, 2 euros of that will be taken on rent. Indeed, in real terms, the disability allowance is worth less than it was in 2020. It has always been a financial challenge to live with a disability. Unfortunately, because of the government's failure, 2026 will be even harder, with an effective 1,400 drop in annual income from last year. Last week's budget was a bitter blow to those who live with a disability. Despite the pre-election promises, the high-profile confrontations, the government parties have done virtually nothing. Today's motion from ourselves is about providing a level of fairness to those who live with a disability. It is about keeping them out of poverty and deprivation, something that last week's budget absolutely failed to do so. So we urge the government to take heed of this financial challenge for vulnerable citizens, to introduce cost of living disability payment, to increase social welfare payments dependent on those with a disability by €20. The government should recognise that Budget 26 will have a devastating impact on people with disabilities, and it should act immediately. And it should also provide a lump sum payment that recognises additional costs supporting those with a disability. Your election promises have been shown to be empty and mere ruse to attract votes. A charade has been abandoned as soon as the votes were counted. You acknowledge that poverty is in run up to the election, but abandon those facing it soon afterwards.
You know, and you know this from the statistics in your own department, people with disabilities and their families are amongst the most at risk of poverty in this state. They've been abandoned in Budget 2026, and that's not me as a member of the opposition standing across from you saying that. That's what they're telling us. They feel abandoned because they've been abandoned. And this is a budget that bears the fingerprints of Fine Gael and the austerity era in every single line. This government has pulled the rug from under people with disabilities. They've taken away the supports that were keeping their households afloat and replaced them with a pitiful €10 increase to the disability allowance, an increase that doesn't even keep pace with real inflation. Food prices, rents and energy bills are all rising, and this government's response, your government's response, is a slap in the face to those who already face the highest cost of living in the state. The government's own research has shown that the additional cost of disability is between €9,000 and €11,000 every single year. The ESRI, and we heard the Taoiseach dismissing the ESRI earlier today, but the ESRI tells us that households with a disabled member are at a very high risk of poverty, that 2 in 5 children in such households grow up at a risk of poverty after housing costs are removed from the equation. And yet, Fine Gael, with the support and leadership of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil would seem look the other way. You cut the cost of living supports that people depended on and refused to introduce a permanent cost of disability payment, a measure that has been called for repeatedly by advocacy groups, by Sinn Féin, by people with disabilities themselves. Our alternative budget set out a different path: a €20 increase in the disability allowance, a €300 lump sum payment to all core social welfare recipients, a €25 increase in domiciliary care allowance, and a €450 energy credit. Real practical measures to help people live with dignity. But instead of fairness and decency, government has chosen indifference and neglect. It's utterly detached from the reality of life for people with disabilities. To suggest that a cost of disability payment might be considered next year, as if poverty can be put on hold, Minister, I think it's an insult. And I mean, it follows the insult that we saw in the general election campaign last year with the then Taoiseach, now Taoiseach. But I mean, we see that carried forward a year, and it's as if nothing has been learnt in that time. So our motion tonight calls for justice, for an immediate lump sum payment this winter, for the development of a permanent cost of disability payment, and it calls on you to reverse course, to stop ignoring those who are suffering most, and to recognise the basic truth that poverty and the maintenance of poverty is a political choice, and it's the wrong one, Minister.
Johnson.
We all know, at least those of us on this side of the House, that there's a substantial additional cost to disability, and there's a mountain of evidence, report after report, setting it out in black and white, and the cost lands on the shoulders of individuals and families across the state. And the question that we're asking here in Sinn Féin and those on this side of the House is why the government is refusing to act, why you have failed to bring forward a cost of disability payment to recognise the reality that people face in their everyday lives. €10 on a disability allowance is an insult. That's what I've been told over and over again by people with disability. those who get hit by the same cost of living crisis as everyone else, but their situation is compounded by the additional associated cost of the disability. And we all thought that there was some glimmer of hope and recognition in recent years when people with disabilities were given extra support as a part of a cost of living package. But that hope, that glimmer of hope, was absolutely, truly shattered in this year's budget. It was cruel what was announced last week, a government that refused, in the face of a €10 billion surplus, to bring forward a cost of living package. Despite massive surpluses, they ripped away a lifeline for people with disabilities. And this year's budget was described, and rightly so, by the Disability Federation of Ireland as a devastating setback for disabled people. My office, and I'm sure as many others have been, has been contacted by so many people living with a disability over the last number of days since the budget was announced. And people that watched in horror as the budget was announced, they are telling us every single day of their stress and fear about the hardship that they are already enduring as they face into the winter. One woman who was in contact with me said, "This year people are scared, really scared. The reality is the government have made those of us living with a disability even more vulnerable. The price of living has only escalated further in the last year, so I honestly don't know how they can justify it." And I agree with every word she echoed. I don't know what to tell her, Minister, because there is no justification for this. Government will offer lip service, they'll offer excuses, but that is cold comfort to people facing into a long, hard winter. And it doesn't mean anything to people with a disability worried about being able to turn on the heating this winter. Or for people living with a disability, it is very clear that this budget was a wrecking ball. The government, even now, even at this late stage, need to come to their senses, need to do the right thing, need to listen to people with disabilities, and need to understand what you have done and given them the cold shoulder in this budget. I'm calling on you, as my colleagues have said in this motion, to introduce a cost of disability payment, to increase the disability allowance by €20 and deliver lump sum payments to people with disabilities this month.
Deputy Kenny.
Speaking at the launch of the 5-year national strategy to improve disability rights in Ireland, the Taoiseach said it was a landmark moment for the advancement of disability rights in Ireland. Then last week, the government cut vital cost of living supports for people with disabilities, and this amounts to a €1,400 drop in income for people with disabilities across the state. While the government announced a landmark moment in the achievement of disability rights in Ireland, at the same time, the same government announced devastating step-backs for people with disabilities and indeed many in their households. This government is pushing one of the most vulnerable people in society into poverty, and it is predicted by the ESRI and the Parliamentary Budget Office that poverty will rise for people with disabilities in the coming years as a consequence of this budget. We have a cost of living crisis that is affecting everyone in the same way, but for people with disabilities and their families it is far worse. They are constantly struggling. They have no disposable income and barely survive on a week-to-week basis. Ireland has the lowest disability employment in the EU, and the reason for this is that people with disability who are in receipt of social protection payment are afraid to take up part-time employment in case they would lose that payment, and we come across them all the time. The system is set up in a way to cut someone if they try to get work, and God forbid that if they decided to take up a part-time or a full-time job, they will be banished forever applying for disability payment again. We need to invest in disability services, and not just because someone may be able to do some part-time work, that does not mean that they are automatically cured from their disability. Disability payments should continue to be paid while people take up employment, and should they have to cease that employment at any time, they should automatically go back to their full-time rate of disability payment without the need for going into a full 12-month application process all over again. That needs to happen. That doesn't happen. Minister, just on the poverty issue, because it's the one that always strikes me. People, when they're in poverty, it's not just, not being able to buy something in their life. It's the absence of ambition. It's the stress and the tension that causes in a family, in a household, that they can't plan for the future. They can't look forward. They become strangled by it. And that's the real cost of poverty, because it has a long-term cost as people go on in life, that they have that fear of ever falling back into that place again. And for people with disability, they have that profound problem with the disability that they have, but then they have the extra problem of it, where they can see that poverty has been a part of their lives as they grew up, and then as they go into adulthood, and that they fear that coming at them again. So, Minister, what we need to do here, if the government is serious about having disability rights, they need to ensure that they stand over those rights, that they actually fund the services for people, but also ensure that people with disabilities have adequate income to be able to live full and proper lives.
Minister Cleary.
Gomagad Laskin Cordogus Gom Wickes, the Sinn Féin, a socht on chance, course to me hummus a fray and not. We're not opposing the motion that has been put forward by Sinn Féin this evening, but we will take the opportunity to discuss these important issues and lay out many of the work that we're currently doing. We absolutely recognise, and it's not exclusive to the opposition, the additional costs that disabled people face in their daily lives. We're committed, and I'm committed to addressing the cost of disability in a comprehensive, but in a permanent and in a sustainable way. Our determination to address this issue is reflected in the Programme for Government commitment to introduce a permanent annual cost of disability support payment with a view to incrementally increasing this payment. Delivering on this commitment is the core objective of the National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People from 2025 to 2030, which we published in mid-September. We know that addressing the cost of disability is not just a question of income support. The delivery of services is also key. The motion and a number of speakers have referred to the Indicon report on the cost of disability, which was commissioned by the Department of Social Protection. That report sets out how addressing the additional cost of disability requires a much broader approach than simply increasing existing payments or introducing new ones. We need all of the departments and all of the agencies of government to work together to address this issue in a comprehensive and in a permanent way. A dedicated disability unit has been established in the Department of Taoiseach to drive progress in enhancing supports for people with disabilities across every sector of government. Progress will also be led and monitored by the Cabinet Committee on Children, Disability and Education. It is because of the need for a cross-government approach that the Strategic Focus Network on the Cost of Disability is being established. This is an important commitment under the National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People. The Strategic Focus Network is being led by the Department of Social Protection, but it is a cross-government exercise. It will also include people with disabilities and their advocates. Work is already underway to establish and define the remit of the Strategic Focus Network. The remit of the network and the timeline for its work will be discussed at the December meeting of the Disability Consultative Forum, which I attend. The members of the forum have already been approached and asked to think about how they would like to see the process operating, and that their ideas and their suggestions will be central to this. The work is also being discussed with a number of key disability advocacy groups bilaterally, and the first of these bilateral meetings will be held at the end of this month. And last and further, I will be asking my officials to reach out to the spokespeople of all the parties for their input into this process as well. It is intended that the network will comprise a range of stakeholders, including disabled people and their advocate. It will consider and develop proposals on how best to help people with disability to meet the additional costs. In addition to considering the appropriate level and eligibility conditions for the cost of disability payment, it is intended that the network will consider what other measures can be taken to reduce or mitigate these costs permanently. This consultation with disabled people will ensure that their voices are central as we work on this issue together in a targeted and, most importantly, in a sustainable way. Our work will be informed by the relevant research, including Indicon, including SRI reports that are referred to in the motion, and I intend to ensure that we have this work completed to bring forward proposals to government in the first half of next year. Let's concur, there are a broad range of income supports already available, which include disability allowance, invalidity pension, blind pension and the partial capacity benefit. There are almost 230,500 people who receive disability income support payments with an estimated investment of €3.24 billion in 2025. Spending on disability payments has increased by €650 million over the past 5 years. The number of beneficiaries has increased by 4.7%. This is permanent expenditure, Laskin Corder. It is not one-off expenditure that is judged on a year-to-year basis. And there has been a €51 a week increase in the weekly disability income support payment since 2021. Budget 2026 is the first of this government's 5 budgets. We are at the start of a 5-year programme for government. Not everything can be done in year 1, but we have put in place a very significant increase in investment in disability services in this budget. I am very conscious, Laskin-Curder, that of our commitment and my desire and the government's desire to support people with disabilities on the cost of disabilities also. The Department of Social Protection package builds on the comprehensive level of support by targeting measures aimed at supporting carers, recipients of domiciliary care allowance, and making it easier for people with disability to progress into and, importantly, to stay in employment. We've provided for a €10 increase in the weekly rate of payment such as disability allowance, which will bring the personal rate of payment to €254 per week from January. There is also the bonus of a double week's payment in December. Recipients of disability allowance who have children will see their weekly rates of child support payment increase by €16 to €78 for children aged 12 or over, and by €8 to €58 for children under 12 from the 1st of January. These are the largest ever increases in these payments, which have increased by €48.20 and €28.20 respectively since 2017. The monthly rate of domiciliary care allowance will increase by €20 to €380 per month from January 2026, representing an increase of over €70 or 23% since 2022. The fuel allowance increases by €5 to €30.08 per week from January 2026, which will provide recipients with an additional €140 during the annual fuel allowance season. I am focused on encouraging people to take up work, and Deputy Kenny's suggestion is one that I am working on. Those working from disability allowance or blind pension to take up work will be able to retain the fuel allowance payment for up to 5 years as a result of this budget. This is important because I'm very aware that the fear of losing secondary benefits is a significant barrier to people taking up employment. We are making the Back to Work family dividend available to those with children who move off disability allowance or blind pension into employment. Under this scheme, a person can retain the value of their child support payment for a year and half of its value in the second year in respect of up to 4 children, which is another important support to help people make the transition into employment. The wage subsidy scheme, as referred to by Deputy O'Rourke, is a key disability employment support provided by my department, which aims to encourage employers to offer substantial and sustainable employment. Budget 2026 provides for reducing the number of bands in the wage subsidy scheme from 5 to 3, from increasing all the rates so that from April 26 the base rate will be €7.50 per hour, up from €6.30. Where an employer employs between 7 and 16 employees under the scheme, they will receive a new rate of €8.50 per hour, and in case of an employer who has 17 employers or more, the new rate will be €10 per hour for each employee. I'll revert to Deputy O'Rourke in relation to his specific query. The budget also provides for extension of the wage subsidy scheme to certain people already at work who acquire a disability or whose ability to work has reduced such that their job tasks or the role has to be significantly adapted by their employer. These improvements build on other recent enhancements to the scheme. We've reduced the minimum hour requirement from 21 to 15 hours per week. We've modernised the language. We've increased the pool of potential employers by extending the scheme to the community and voluntary sector and to the non-commercial semi-state sector. We've made significant changes last concurred to the carers allowance means test. The weekly income disregard will be increased by 60% from €625 to €1,000 for a single person and from €1,250 to €2,000 for carers with a spouse, partner or cohabitant. Since June 2022, this will amount to cumulative increases to the disregards of €667.50 for a single carer and $1,335 for a carer who's part of a couple, or an increase of just over 200%. In Budget 2026, the Government has allocated €3.8 billion to the Department of Children, Disability and Equality for disability services in 2026, which includes funding for community-based specialist disability services to ensure that those with disability receive the right support at the right time in the right place. This represents a 20% increase year on year and an overall increase since 2020 of €1.8 billion. We have established a dedicated unit in the Department of Children, Disability and Equality to drive reform and lead a full review of Ireland's disability service model, which will work hand in hand with disabled people, their families and representative organisations to share a long-term vision for services. In conclusion, we are not opposing this motion and I look forward to the ideas. I'm absolutely committed to introducing a permanent cost of disability payment, but one that is not designed by government, but one that is designed and has the input of those with disability, with their advocates and with as many with a genuine interest in this area whose views we can capture.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Carthy.
Among those who really felt let down by last week's budget were people with disabilities and their families. Now, these are families that are used to the parties in government failing them, but once again, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael didn't even try to prove them wrong. Disabled people feel the brunt of the cost of living crisis. They suffer as much, arguably more, than all others that were abandoned by what I would describe as a horrible, cruel budget last week. But disabled people also face costs that most of us don't. There's a recognised cost of disability, recognised by everyone, it seems, except members of this government. So there must be a permanent cost of disability payment. And that payment shouldn't just stop at pension age, because the cost of disability doesn't stop. It's unfair and nonsensical that someone who's entitled to a disability payment until they reach retirement age are then moved on to an old age pension with no recognition to the additional financial burden that their disability brings. Families with children with profound disabilities often and regularly face the greatest burden of all. That's especially true in counties like Cavan and Monaghan, where children are denied the services and treatments that they deserve from the HSE. Waiting lists for occupational therapy, for speech and language therapy, for physiotherapy treatments are so long, especially in Cavan, that it's probably simpler to say that they don't exist at all. Minister, of the 225 children that are awaiting an assessment for disciplinary support in Cavan, 208 of them have been waiting over a year. So what does that mean for parents? It means that they spend every spare penny they have trying to source private treatment. And government continually give them a kick in the teeth, forcing families to source the treatment, often involving long distances of travel, and then refusing to reimburse them the costs involved. Minister, like many of your contemporaries on those benches, you talk the talk in terms of respecting and caring for our citizens with disabilities, but you're not walking the walk in terms of providing them with the supports that they actually need.
I want to commend my colleagues for their work on this motion, but most importantly, I want to pay tribute to the various disability advocacy groups for their invaluable assistance. Minister, for 18 years I worked as a carer for people with disabilities in South Kilkenny. The most consistent thing I encountered over those years was that people with a disability want to live as independently as possible. But the harsh reality is that the actions of you and your colleagues over the course of several budgets have made this increasingly difficult. You have pushed them towards a greater dependency on family, friends and neighbours. They face the loss of their disability allowance and other essential supports like medical cards with even the slightest increase in their income. So many people living with a disability want to work, they want to contribute what they can to society, they want to experience the social inclusion that comes with it. But the risk of losing these vital supports holds them back. As a result, people with disabilities and their households are at a dangerous risk of poverty. This is simply wrong. These are not the values of equality that our republic is built on. The state should be tearing down these barriers to social inclusion, not building them higher. It is clear to me, as someone who worked in the disability sector for 18 years, that too many in the Dáil simply do not understand these daily struggles. Because if you did, if we had more elected members with this lived experience, we would have seen a very different budget last week. A miserable €10 increase in disability allowance is an insult. It doesn't even keep up with inflation. There is a cost of living crisis that we are all aware of. But what it is not addressing enough is the harsh reality, cost of living crisis that those living with a disability. Minister, I want to share with the Dáil the words of one such person who lives with this reality every day. I have to attend a food bank weekly, and apart from it being demoralising, it's a necessity to survive. Simply, the word saving does not apply to me, and it's simply there's nothing left. I know the cold, long winter nights are around the corner, and it scares me to think about it. Minister, it is our duty to ensure that those living with a disability are not left behind and are not shut off from society and get to play their part in an inclusive Ireland. Gurmahagal.
Minister, Budget 2026 was an insult to people with disabilities. Cost of living measures have been pulled. A miserable €10 increase in the disability allowance payment was all that you could offer. The Disability Federation of Ireland are estimating that this amounts to a €1,400 drop in income for people with disabilities, for a group that are already at an increased risk of poverty. Their research shows that households with a disabled member require, on average, 50% extra disposable income to achieve the same standard of living as a similar household with no disabled members. You knew all of this, but you made a political choice to abandon people with disabilities in this budget and to push even more people into poverty. Government have to recognise the fact that living with a disability comes with increased costs, and people need supports that reflects that. And Minister, you have said that you do recognise this and that you do want to introduce a cost of disability payment in future, but that is no comfort to people with disabilities in the here and now who are going to struggle to pay their bills this winter. I hosted the Brothers of Charity Galway Advocacy Council here in Leinster House recently. They gave a presentation in the AV room where they spoke about the increased costs they face to maintain a decent quality of life, and they raised issues like the cost and frequency of applying for disabled parking permits, the cost of repeated essential blood tests that are not being covered by their medical card, the cost of essential accessible transport, to name but a few. And all of these items add up. They are not optional for people with disabilities, and they're left having to decide which essential items are prioritised. Budget 2026 was an opportunity to ease cost pressures on people with disabilities, but you have decided to abandon them, and saying that there might be a better package down the line is out of touch. People need support now, and supporting people with disabilities is one of the most fundamental things we must do as a society, and government must act now to provide adequate financial support. And finally, I just want to say in relation to carers, you've committed to abolishing the means test, but the investment in this budget hasn't been sufficient. It will take you over a decade to abolish the means test if you continue at this pace, and this also needs to be reconsidered. There was big promises made to carers during the general election. They need to be treated with respect, and you need to live up to them.
As Cian Corley, Budget 26 was a serious step backwards for people with disability, and they are angry, Minister, and rightly so. The Indicon report commissioned by Government in 2021 put the financial cost of disability in the region of €12,000 a year. An ESRI study showed households with a disabled member face significant financial burdens and are at very high risk of poverty. For people unable to work due to a disability, the 2024 CSO poverty figures show that 1 in 5 live in consistent poverty. 2 in 5 live in enforced deprivation, unable to afford the essentials such as heating and new clothes. The at-risk poverty rate increased by 5% last year to 32.5%. And when you take out the one-off cost of living measures, that at-risk of poverty rate was actually 37.4%. Now, government ministers and backbenchers have been beside yourselves for the last week, saying not everything can be done in one budget. But how long does government want people with disabilities to actually actually wait. Talk that government may consider a cost of disability payment next year's budget is completely detached from the reality of how poverty affects disabled people in the here and in the now. As if subjecting hundreds of thousands of people to the harm of poverty and material deprivation in the coming year can be simply undone with the tick of a pen this time next. Will you now, you have time, Minister, you have time. Will you now develop and introduce a cost of disability payment? Will you increase the disability allowance and other disability contingent social welfare payments by €20 from this January as an interim measure to begin to recognise that the additional costs that come with living with a disability? And will you deliver a lump sum payment for people with disabilities this month to provide immediate recognition of these additional costs? It was cruel and, quite frankly, unjustifiable to pull supports from a group of people who experience such high levels of poverty and such high levels of deprivation. Government budget goes nowhere near what needs to be done in terms of support for a disabled community and what those disabled community deserve in return. But Minister, you have the opportunity. You can do the right thing. You can make meaningful steps now to ensure that anybody living with a disability isn't also living in fear of how they're going to heat their home, how they're going to keep the lights on, how they're going to put petrol or diesel in their car.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Wall.
First of all, I want to thank Sinn Féin for bringing forward this very important motion on a costability payment, and I do welcome the fact that you're in the chamber with us tonight, Minister, to listen to this debate. I want to firstly begin with an email that was sent to me by a constituent of mine who has MS in response to Budget 2026. She goes on to say, I cannot work and my husband's wage is above the disability threshold. I have a son in college and another in secondary school. I've been diagnosed since 2018. I've never got any financial support and have to pay for all the therapies. It is tough, degrading, but I have had hope today that something in the budget would help me. I'm not angry anymore, I'm just heartbroken. Today I feel invisible and forgotten. I'm not looking for money to go and buy treats. It's just for physio, acupuncture, which helps with my pain, diesel money and car parking for regular medical appointments. Tala Hospital is €10 parking. Good quality shoes to help me with walking. The daily cost of living is crazy. What can I do so the government can hear my voice? The disabled don't shout, so we are easily pushed into a corner. I don't believe they will put finance into services that most won't even benefit from. It's just words to distract the public and kick that can down the road. That's just one example, Minister, of some of the emails that I have received. Like disabled people, like my constituents, are forced to survive on low incomes while facing sky-high extra costs every single day. We know that from the Indicon Cost of Ability in Ireland report published back in 2021, that people with disability face extra costs of between nearly $9,000 and $12,000 a year. These are costs that are not covered by current social welfare payments like the disability allowance. Since 2021, there has been a dramatic inflationary pressure impacting many households, with the real cost of disability increasing between $10,500 and even close to $15,000. These additional costs can increase with the number of disabilities or chronic illnesses, with the highest average costs, we are told, in the region of nearly €50,000. I don't think this government has no idea what it has done to the disabled community. Government have left them totally devastated, with the Disability Federation of Ireland calling this a betrayal. Government has shown no intention of addressing the cost of disability or changing outdated social welfare limits that confine many disabled people to their homes. These are all the core issues that they have been left on the long finger. While government rhetoric focused on increased investment in services, which we all will welcome, this will do little to affect the challenges facing people with disabilities on a daily basis, such as the high levels of unemployment and poverty. There are at least 8 programmes for government commitments to addressing the cost of disability, including introducing a cost of disability payment and extending free travel to children that receive the DCA payment. Budget 26 did not address a single one of these commitments. What Budget 26 did, in fact, was to increase the costs faced by disabled people in this country. Government's decision to cut measures from the previous budget now mean that, as has been said by many speakers in this House, that many disabled people will lose almost €1,300 a year. That's not spare cash, Minister, anyone has lying around. It's what kept the lights on and the house warm. These measures should have been made permanent into a cost of disability payment, which the Labour Party proposed starting at €25 a week. Instead, government decided to introduce subsidised burgers. It is remarkable that only a few weeks ago that the government published its first ever human rights strategy for disabled people, but this has not been matched with the ambition nor the required funding in Budget 2026. It has left disabled people and their families feeling invisible and forgotten once again. Nearly $700 million wasted on a VAT cut for Ronald McDonald. This is a big business sector that is already making massive profits, while disabled people like my constituent aren't entitled to a single ounce of support from this government. This isn't pocket change. It's almost $700 million that will be of most benefit to those in big business. Along with the cost of disability payment, nearly a year, $1.2 billion was given away to fast food chains and property developers. This could have increased the income disregard for those with the disability allowance to €250. It could have increased the funding for employability further and workability programmes to support people with disabilities in the workplace. It could have provided for 1,000 extra places on the wage subsidy scheme, restoring the link to 70% of the national minimum wage, and introduced reforms to improve the scheme. All of this would have only costed, in our costed budget, $350 million, enough left over to provide even more supports, like increasing the living alone allowance to €27 per week and increasing the fuel allowance by $9.50, providing for an additional 4 weeks also. Not for the first time in this House, Minister, I wish to raise those living with a disability and the problems that they have in gaining employment. The wage subsidy scheme could provide a much better mechanism to provide a pathway for more people to enter employment. However, in a conversation with one of the biggest employers of those with a disability, Rehab, they state the government's announcement of a €1.20 increase in the minimum wage seems disingenuous, given the actual increases applied to anyone employing more than 2 disabled employees range between 18 cents and 94 cents, considerably less than the €1.20, and in most instances is less than the increase to the national minimum wage of 65 cents. This is the type of commentary I'm getting back on the budget proposals, Minister, and I ask you that these examples should be and must be re-examined. I want to end, Lascian Corla, by putting on the Dáil record a conversation that I had with a person in receipt of disability allowance on my way into Dublin today. This person cannot afford to put the heating on for the hours his disability and medical condition should need. Instead, he goes to bed early and wraps himself up in his duvet. To add insult to him, his phone was recently cut off for a number of days by Air, even though they knew he was a vulnerable customer. The reply from that company when he rang them back on getting his phone back was they had a new system in and the computer did not recognise that he was a vulnerable customer. All this, Minister, for an outstanding bill, he tells me, of €96. This, Minister, is an example of the daily life of many of the people I deal with who are living in a disability. This is why government should have chosen a disability payment over a big VAT cut for bigger and bigger businesses.
Thanks, Deputy Ward. Deputy Kenny.
And I want to thank Sinn Féin for putting this motion forward, and I thank Minister Cleary as well for his presence in the chamber. This is an extremely important debate because it affects every single TD in this House, people calling to our constituency offices in relation to family members or to themselves in relation to their own disabilities. And often it's the case that you come across people who are in very difficult circumstances, who may be on disability allowance, where, as my colleague Deputy Wall has given an example of, cannot turn on the heating, cannot afford to pay a phone bill, cannot afford to keep the lights on. And that's the difficulty that we face. And it's shameful that politicians in this country would have to speak with individuals who have disabilities and offer them absolutely nothing of substance to keep them warm in their homes, to allow them to keep their lights on, to allow them the opportunity to keep their phone on. Minister, the rigmarole itself of the disability allowance form is something that I struggle to comprehend. And the difficulty for a lot of people out there who cannot fill out the form itself is quite difficult. I previously worked for former Deputy Sean Sherlock, and I spent a lot of my time filling out disability application forms for individuals because they genuinely cannot do it. And now my own secretary fills out disability application forms for people. And ultimately that is the ground hurling, Minister. That is what we're there to do. But it's so difficult for some individuals to present themselves at a constituency office to ask people who are working within the constituency office to fill out that form. I want to slightly touch on something, Minister, that goes out of your own remit, if you'll indulge me on that, and that is the assessment of needs in this country. Assessment of needs, Minister, is one of the biggest difficulties that I absolutely face from families coming to me, and it is often the most stressful of cases that families are coming to the local politician to try and solve for them, to progress an assessment of need. And it's deeply emotional. It absolutely is deeply emotional. And it is emotional, Minister, because at the centre of it is a child. And that's ultimately the bottom line. We are not giving the entitlements to children in this country who are facing barrier after barrier after barrier to get the essential therapies and supports that they so badly need. There are a number of examples I could give you. A manager and a CDNT team in Cork told a family, and I quote, "We are finding it impossible to source a psychologist to allow us to complete the assessments. We are continuing to explore all the options, but we are not in a position to complete any autism assessment right now." A school in Cork informed parents that they will be moving to either a 3 or 4 day week due to the critical shortage of special needs assistants. These children, Minister, depend on consistency and care provided in schools. I want to very briefly compliment Minister Michael Moynihan for the progress that he has made in the rolling out of essential school therapies. But the consistent barriers that students are facing, and I know this from absolute experience, and I'll say it on the record of the Dáil, I know it from experience. There are children who were in my classroom, Minister, at a secondary level, who should not have been in a mainstream environment. They should not have been. But the reason they are in there is because there was such a backlog in assessment of needs that they couldn't have been given the opportunity to go in to a special education needs setting. At the centre of this, consistently, are children. I understand it goes outside your own remit, Minister, but this government must realise the extent of the problems that families are facing across this country at present.
Thank you, Lascion Corla. And firstly, I wish to commend Sinn Féin on their motion here this evening. Minister, as you know, it has been long recognised that having a disability comes with significant additional financial pressures, which include costs of therapy, equipment, transport, amongst other things. And despite repeated calls from advocacy groups over many years to introduce a cost of disability payment, your government decided not to implement this measure in Budget 2026. So the gulf between government rhetoric and action on disability remains immense and has little sign of closing as things stand. The Social Democrats proposed a cost of disability payment in our alternative budget that would have amounted to €1,040 per year and an additional €780 over a year in disability allowance. The government has increased disability allowance annually by €520. meaning disabled people are €1,300 worse off per year under this budget than they would have been under our proposals. A joint study earlier this year from the Economic Social Research Institute and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, entitled Adjusting Estimates of Poverty for the Cost of Disability, shows that the additional costs faced by disabled people are now estimated to be between 52 and 59% of disposable income. And for those with more severe difficulties, this rises to as much as a staggering 83 to 93%. And these can involve a range of issues, including personal assistance and carers, as well as I said, equipment, transport, medicines. The report also highlighted how traditional poverty measurements underestimate the level of deprivation experienced by people with disabilities because they fail to account for these unavoidable additional costs. So this is a very stark reflection, Minister, of how far behind this country is in providing meaningful support to disabled people. The introduction of a non-means tested cost of disability payment has been proposed as far back as 2006 by the National Disability Authority, who undertook detailed costings and research at that stage, and this was updated in the comprehensive Indicon report of 2021, both of which clearly demonstrated the significant extra costs involved with living with a disability. The findings have been consistently echoed by the Disability Federation of Ireland, who have also long advocated for this cost of disability payment. And if it was enacted, it would represent a structural long-term recognition of the cost of disability. And it comes down, Minister, to a basic matter of fairness and equality and dignity for people with disabilities. It is injurious to people with disabilities that they have been put to the back of the queue once again for financial support, and after being left with a significant reduction in income after the stripping away of one-off measures that had been introduced to buy the last election. This was described by the Disability Federation of Ireland as, quote, a betrayal of disabled people in this year's budget. Vague reference in the budget to consultation on a cost of disability payments that might be introduced at some point in the future adds further insult to injury. Changes to the wage subsidy scheme are a further disappointment from the budget. The scheme is, as you know, a financial support to employers who recruit people with disabilities. An increase of €1.20 per hour from €6.30 to €7.50 only applies to employers with a maximum of 2 disabled employees. So any other employer who's taking on more than 2 disabled people receive the wage subsidy scheme on a sliding scale, meaning for the most part that the more people with disabilities employed, the less the increase. As such, Rehab Group, which is one of the largest non-governmental employers of people with disabilities, will receive just an extra 55 cents from last year's rate per hour. This seems grossly unfair, Minister, and clearly penalises employers seeking to take on more people with disabilities into the workforce. Finally, the budget just gone was the government's opportunity to match their nice words on valuing carers with concrete actions that would both recognise the indispensable nature of carers' work and also the degree to which the work of carers actually saves the state billions of euro, and would be an opportunity to meaningfully acknowledge carers' work as opposed to some form of optional charity. And as with so many basics of a just society, the government decided to tinker around the edges of the means test for carers' allowance rather than abolish it once and for all. This leaves many carers who have had to leave their careers to look after a family member who require full-time care and support without this modest payment, to provide them with a modicum of financial security because their savings or their spouse's income pushes them slightly over the threshold. And for carers who are locked out of this basic financial support, applying for the carers allowance and being rejected is a draining, grinding, alienating process. The government and yourself, Minister, talked about being unable to abolish the means test in Budget 2026, almost with a sense of inevitability, and implied that proposals by the Social Democrats to do so were naive or idealistic. But dragging out this decision over a 5-year term is not inevitable. It is a political choice. The government could have asked banks that are highly profitable and that were bailed out by the state during the financial crash to pay a bit more, or it could continue leaning on carers for their thankless work, intruding into their finances and devaluing their contribution to society. And unfortunately, your government chose the latter. And in so doing, you again underestimated carers and people with disabilities, not just for their qualities and for their contribution to society, but also you underestimated their growing political power as a movement that will bring about electoral change in this country very soon.
Quiz or Deputy Gallen?
acknowledging Sinn Féin for bringing forward the motion that we're going to speak on tonight. Without question, we will support it wholeheartedly. The cost of disability payment is long overdue. It's fair, it's practical, and it recognises what the state has known for years, that living with a disability in Ireland carries a very real financial cost. Its omissions from last week's budget was profoundly disappointing. The government's own Indicon report found that people with disabilities face extra costs of between €9,000 and €11,000 every single year. The SRI report confirmed that the same pattern again this year. Households with a person with a disability are far more likely to live in poverty. But there is another cost I want to speak about tonight. It's a cost that you don't see in a budget and you won't find in a balance sheet. It's the emotional cost of care, the anxiety for those who provide care to a loved one. Last night I attended a meeting in the Ballybock Handball Alley alongside Deputy Marie Sherlock. It's something that I'm sure every single one of us who have the privilege of doing the job we do, probably a week doesn't go by when you will meet a person and you'll hear the story that stops you in your tracks. Last night I was invited to the initiation of a campaign group called Before I Die. There, I met more than 24 parents, mothers and fathers who have spent their lives caring for their sons and daughters with intellectual disabilities. I was at the bottom of what was a row of seats. In front of me was about 24 parents of all ages, some in their 80s, some slightly younger and slightly younger again. Some having gone through a divorce, others having lost a husband or a wife. Each of them carried a picture of their now adult children who they provide care for every day, and they looked at us as people who they voted to represent them and told their story of the care they provide to their son or their daughter, and then simply asked the question of us, what happens to our child who is now an adult after we pass away? Honestly, it is a question that will any of us that hear those stories look into the whites of the eyes of the people who are asking us that question. You can't help but wear it on your skin and make a commitment that you will carry that story into the chambers where we make decisions that have impacted their lives. That question, what will happen before we die, is at the heart of their campaign and is one that no parent should ever have to ask. Among them were Tony and Susan, whose daughter Aoife is 42. She's bright, funny and full of life. Tony and Susan are in their 70s now. They've loved and cared for Aoife every day of her life. What they said to me, and what every parent in that room said in their own way, was this: what happens when we're gone? Right now, more than 24 adults with intellectual disabilities are still living at home with their 2,000 adults with intellectual disabilities are still living at home with their parents. 500 of those carers are already over 80. More than 1,200 people under 65 are in nursing homes, not because that's what they need, but because there's nowhere else for them to go. That's not a care system. That is crisis disguised as normality. These families have held up Ireland's disability services through sheer love and determination, but they are exhausted. They live with a constant fear that they can no longer lift, feed or comfort their child, that the state will not be there. And the services that should support them are now stretched to breaking point. St Michael's House had 5 respite houses before the recession. It now only has 1. Providers are running on deficits, staff are leaving, supports arrives in emergencies, but never as a right. The National Federation of Voluntary Service Providers has warned that families are in crisis and services are in survival mode. That's what I saw last night in Ballybock. People have given everything and are still living in fear, not for their death, but simply what happens afterwards. So yes, we need a cost of disability payment, and I welcome it wholeheartedly, but if we stop there, we'll miss a deeper truth. The cost of care is being paid every day in exhaustion, in anxiety, and in quiet panic of ageing parents who fear dying by the forward. If we stop there, we'll miss a deeper truth. The cost of care is being paid every day in exhaustion, in anxiety, and in quiet panic of ageing parents who fear dying by the forward their children are safe. Love should never be a substitute for a state. If the government is serious about equality, those parents who I met last night have asked for 3 things. They've asked for the creation of a national residential care plan for adults with disabilities, publish clear targets and ring-fence funding and close the shortfall of between 800 and 2,300 residential places within the lifetime of your government. Second, restore respite care to at least pre-recession levels. Families need time to rest and recover. Respite is never a luxury, it is what keeps everything else standing. And thirdly, we've asked to fix the funding model for disability providers. There are 30,000 people working in this sector. They need stability to plan, to hire and to keep delivering care with dignity, because this isn't charity. This is the essence of what it means to be a citizen. Last night in Ballybuck, every parent told me the same thing. They don't want sympathy, they want certainty. They want to know their children will be safe, that they'll be valued and that they will be loved when they're gone. Last Cancorla, we call ourselves a republic that cherishes all its children equally. But if we continue like this, leaving families to carry the emotional and the financial burden of the state, well then those words simply mean nothing. A cost of disability payment will ease some of the pressure, but it must be the start of something bigger, a turning point where we finally build a country that plans ahead, that provides and that gives families a peace of mind. Before we die, that's the name of their campaign. It's a plea, but it's also a challenge to build a republic that truly cares for people like Aoife. Not after their parents are gone, but while they're still here to see it, because parents have already given everything else. Last Cancorla, there's so much we can do for people with disabilities in this country. A minimum starting point could be to provide their parents with the certainty to know that after they're gone, that they will be cared for. I think it's the essence of a republic. What else matters beyond that?
Next Deputy Stanley.
Minister, 1 in 12 people have a disability, roughly 8% of the population, and have a lifelong disability. And this is, this presents a challenge for society, how we treat these people. 2 in 5 of those people with disability risk poverty. 1 in 5 lives in absolute poverty and consistent poverty. And that's a shocking figure in itself. And it's well documented that the cost of living is higher for disability. The costs have been well outlined in terms of transport, the extra costs, medical costs, heating costs and everything else. And a government report, and we must look at this as well, Minister, in the context of a cost of living crisis. We're not living in normal times. If you look at the rate of inflation, it's accelerating, particularly the cost of essentials such as heating and food and transport and everything else. But a government report way back in 2021, that actually confirmed that an additional cost of between 9,480 and 11,734 euros was the cost of actually having a disability. And that's huge. So I think what we're discussing here tonight is important. To develop a cost of living disability payment, to give an additional €20 per week from January, and for a lump sum payment this month to provide immediate assistance to people with disabilities. I think that's really, really important that we do that. And I just say to you that it's a huge issue. And can I just, in terms of the cost of disability, there's one issue I want to highlight to you regarding young people, which I'm sure you've come across, that a reply here from the HSE, and they tell me that in the region I live in, Lee Shoffley, they say that there's currently a backlog of approximately 20 months plus for an assessment of need. That's for a child that needs an assessment of need. Now, I know it's even taken longer than that. And what that means there, Minister, is very simple. Those parents are begging and borrowing to meet that cost because they're going privately to get those assessments done. And that's only to get the assessment done. When they get the assessment done, they then have to go and try and source the therapies, which are often not available. So I just want to highlight that as one additional cost, particularly with people with children with special needs, to bring that home to you. If we just say to you that one young person in the county contacted me, contacted many, but one in particular put this very well. If I could say, it wrote me a letter and said, I'm writing to you regarding my concerns about the recently announced budget. As a young person's income, my income is exclusively disability allowance due to my circumstances, and the budget for 2026 has overlooked and neglected my needs and the needs of many others. Disability allowance, as you know, is €10 of an increase to €254. However, the poverty line in 2024 for a single adult, such as myself, was assessed by St Vincent de Paul as anything below €346. That's what it said to me in the letter. And just to highlight that to you, the human story behind this, could I say to you as well, Minister, that a lot of people who have a disability, because they're isolated in their home, to suffer from depression and due to their living isolation and also due to their financial situation. The mortality rate is a lot higher for people with disability. They're more likely to suffer from mental health issues if they're confined to the home, and particularly if there's no work. And the pathways to employment for people with disability in this state are not good. I recently visited Rehab Enterprises in Laois to see the work that they're doing and meet some of the people there with disabilities. And it's heartening to see what they can do when they're given the opportunity. But Ireland ranks the lowest in terms of employment for those with a disability by almost 20%. For women, it's worse. Women with disability rises to 45% of a difference. Those who are moderately disabled should be given better opportunities to gain employment and better access to education. And particularly young people with disability and work, it's really important that their ability, not their disability, but their ability and talents are recognised, valued and utilised. And I would really impress on you, Minister, the importance of trying to develop pathways, further pathways to work. I think it's really, really important that we do that, because a lot of them have so much to offer. I'm sure you've seen it yourself, cases with people with disabilities, that we don't recognise their ability enough. So just to conclude, with the budget, with the rate now at 254 for 2026, it's inadequate. The gap is in the region of around 10,000. As I said to you, St Vincent de Paul said a minimum of 346 per week is required, but I think €20, at least €20 of an increase from January would be a start. And let's start looking at disabled people's ability and less under disability. I really encourage the government to do that out into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Les Ciancorla. Minister, it is accepted that persons with disabilities and their families face a much higher cost of living than people generally. Indeed, a government-commissioned report prepared by Indecon in 2021 confirmed this, and that reported the additional cost at between €9,500 and €12,000 per annum. Research by the Ascension Partnership put the additional cost at about €244 per week. And a study this year by the Economic and Social Research Institute showed that households with disabled persons face significant financial burdens and are at a very high risk of poverty. Many of these households are doubly affected because they also have members who care on a 24-hour basis on a carer's allowance of €260 per week or €155 per hour. It's not unusual, therefore, for carers themselves to become ill from stress, overwork and isolation, resulting in a situation where both disabled persons and the carers are hospitalised. It is important to note that carers save the state about €20 billion each year, preventing avoidable hospital admissions and enabling many people to remain in their homes safely for longer periods. In the run-up to the last general election, all parties committed to introducing a weekly cost of disability payment. There is no sign of that payment currently, nor is it in last week's budget. And I fully agree with the motion put forward here by Sinn Féin this evening, which calls for the introduction immediately of a weekly cost of living payment and a lump sum payment before Christmas in recognition of the additional costs. I want to return again, Minister, to the fundamental issue of the timely assessment of needs within the 6-month time limit. The Government continues to break the law, which requires the completion of an assessment of needs within 6 months of referral. There are 16,000 children on waiting lists currently. That's estimated to increase to 20,000 by the year end. And there's over 40,000 on waiting lists for various therapies, speech and language, occupational therapy, psychology, etc., etc. I welcome the additional monies for the assessment needs included in the budget last week, and I want to commend the Teenage Disability Rights campaigner Cara Darmody from Ardfin in South Tipperary, who has extracted 2 tranches of funding for this service. Unfortunately, even with the extra funding, we will still be running to stand still, and the Government will still continue to break the law, denying thousands of children their legal right to an assessment within the 6-month time limit. This is because there is no policy, no strategy and no plan to deal with the unacceptable waiting list. Much has been made of the Special Government Committee on Disability based in the Taoiseach's office, but we've seen no coherent plan emerging from this committee to tackle the assessment of needs waiting lists. Dollops of money at budget time alone will not solve this problem. Last week, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Disability Matters heard presentations from representatives of the National Disability Authority. And that authority was established under the National Disability Authority Act of 1999, and its main statutory functions are to advise the Government on disability policy and related issues, to undertake and commission research in relation to disability, develop standards and codes of practice to support accessibility and universal design, to monitor the implementation of disability policy and legislation at national level, and to promote universal design across services, the built environment, information and communication technology and public policy. And its role is to provide evidence, policy advice and monitoring that informs government decision making. I was surprised and disappointed to find that the Special Cabinet Committee on Disability hadn't even requested advice from the authority on how the unacceptable assessment of needs waiting list might be dealt with. And I was further surprised to find that the authority itself had not, on its own initiative and on the basis of its statutory advisory responsibility, suggested or proposed such a plan to deal with the unacceptable waiting list. Timely assessment of needs, as you know, Minister, is the fundamental issue. It's the fundamental issue facing disability services. It's the foundation and the basis for all future education and development for the individuals concerned, and the development of the necessary services. It is as if this issue is not being taken seriously. And this evening I want to call on the National Disability Authority and the Government to urgently prepare and publish a paper on how the huge waiting list for the assessment of needs is to be dealt with into the future. This, I believe, is a fundamental issue and underpins everything that needs to be done in relation to disability services. And the sooner we have that plan, the sooner we have that paper, the better.
Senator Tom Cronin today hosted a briefing on the challenges still facing children with scoliosis and spina bifida. And while I will look at this area again in its own right, I wanted this evening absolutely reiterate my full support for a full public inquiry on the whole scandal regarding the treatment of children awaiting scoliosis operations and related treatments, covering the entire lifespan of Children's Health Ireland, but also going back to the years preceding its establishment. We need to shine a light on this shameful period and learn from the mistakes going forward. Now, Senator Cronin, in his contribution today, also used the opportunity to highlight again how a rights-based approach to dealing with disability issues is required. This doesn't mean turning on an endless tap of money, but it does mean looking from the perspective of fundamental rights, where nobody should be forced into poverty because of their disability, nobody should be disincentivised from working because of their disability, and family carers should be adequately covered for their contribution to helping people with disabilities where appropriate, or indeed other family members who would otherwise cost the state far more were they to be left within the system. And I'm talking about the people who care for elderly parents, for example, who could be in the system in that case. But in terms of disability services, it means funding services adequately and supporting people with disabilities to enjoy a meaningful quality of life rather than subsistence living. Ireland, as people will recall, signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNCRPD, in 2007, which wasn't ratified until March 2018. But last year, Ireland announced its decision to accede to the optional protocol of the UNCRPD, which allows individuals to file complaints with the UN if they believe their rights under the Convention have been violated. Now, I heard the Minister state earlier that the Government is totally aware of the cost of disability and is committed to dealing with this on a, quote, human rights basis. But it had better act soon or the complaints will be mounting up. Because, Minister, it's over 4 years now since the Indicon report on the hidden costs of disability were published. Remember, it was commissioned by the Department of Social Protection. We heard contributions talk about the €10,000 average cost cited in government reports like the Indicon report and the more recent ESRI report. But as the Disability Federation has pointed out, with inflation over the last couple of years, the estimates in some of these reports could be up to €15,000, depending on different costs, which is more than the payment itself. So in the last 3 budgets, the government did provide the one-off cost of disability supports post-COVID. In Budget 2026, all of these have been removed, with nothing that's been indicated to replace them. So that means, as others have said, that people with disabilities are facing higher costs and less supports. The DFI and others welcomed, obviously, the overall increase in funding, and we do have the €10 increase in the disability allowance. But taken as a whole, in the round, this will actually see many incomes fall without the permanent social protection supports. So you're talking about the removal of the living alone allowance, the disability support grant, electricity credits, the October double payment, all that's retrograde. The cost of disability, remember, is the extra spending needs that people with a disability face in their day-to-day lives that other members of society, like myself, don't have to deal with. I can't talk from anyone's experience. I haven't experienced it myself, but I can only take on board what people have said to me, constituents. So areas like mobility aids, transport, communication, care costs outside of family carers, other forms of assistance, medicines, medical equipment, all sorts of appliances, including the adaptations of day-to-day appliances that are not required by people who do not have disabilities within society. Now, I'm just thinking, a relative of mine is a taxi driver, and a lot of his clientele are persons with disabilities, because many times people have no choice but to get taxis because they mightn't be able to drive, mightn't have an adapted car, mightn't be able to afford an adapted car, but also because of the basic shortage of accessible public transport. The system itself doesn't always get from A to B efficiently. And Bus Connects, of course, have said that turning one older route people are used to getting into 2 is more efficient, but not for a person in the wheelchair. 2 friends in the wheelchair going out socialising, in many cases, have to get 2 separate buses because it's not always feasible. Only the newer buses have the wheelchair space and the buggy space. The older ones don't have that. And that's a hidden discrimination that people have to face. You can't even have normal socialisation with friends if those 2 friends are both in wheelchairs. It's one example of a direct cost, but there's also those items that a person has to do by spending their limited disposable income on items that more able-bodied people would never have to even think about. So whatever way you look at it, the costs are there. Now, the government referenced the move towards a cost of disability payment, and if it comes in, it can't come in soon enough. If this budget is a holding position, it's a woefully inadequate holding position. The cost of living hits people with disabilities a lot more and needs to be put on a long-term footing as soon as possible. I'm just trying to think of what the Irish Wheelchair Association said about the budget. I think it was something like heat or eat. Well, the government needs to step up or step down in this instance. It shouldn't be either or. People deserve a reasonable quality of life. Thank you.
Deputy Lawless.
Firstly, I want to welcome this motion here before the House. There is a significant cost to having a disability and for families with a person with disabilities. And indeed, the Indicon report clearly outlines that cost in the region of €10,000 per year. And in that context, I very much welcome the motion in terms of the introduction of a cost of disability payment, a lump sum payment, and indeed an increase to the disability allowance. And there's no question, Minister, that the government are leaving families and people with disabilities. And Minister, I want to raise and I want to speak today on behalf of families and children in Mayo in the CDNT Team 3, the region that represents Achill Island, Westport, Lewisburg, Ballinrobe, Kilmaine, Shrule. All of these families and these children, Minister, are about to receive a cut in terms of their posts for CDNT. Families in this region have been fed in recent days and weeks a food salad, a word salad,
vague assurances, slippery phrasing and political spin. A Mayo TD, following a briefing from the HSE, told parents that there would be no cut, no current hours cut in relation to front-line therapy, just a removal of a vacant post, Minister, as if everything was fine. This kind of political spin is, I think, insulting to parents. And I want to be very clear, Minister, that the restructuring that is happening in the CDNT network is in terms of robbing from Peter to play Paul, in terms of taking vacant posts to fill other posts, is deeply wrong. And these families are not confused, as was suggested. They're tired and they're heartbroken. And they know what they are losing, and they know the potential that is being lost in relation to this. The removal of posts, Minister, were approved on the basis of need. And removing them does not essentially disappear that need, Minister. It means that the chance to fill that need is gone. And that's what you are doing when you remove a vacant post. In our region, children have waited over 3 years for therapy. The team of CDNT3 was supposed to grow to 5 speech and language therapists. And instead of those positions being filled, the post has been removed. Now, Minister, when I went to school, 5 minus 1 was 4. That is a cut, and it has been fed to these families as if it's a positive thing. Minister, parents are not confused. They're absolutely devastated. And vacant posts does not mean that there's no demand. It actually means that there's a failure within the HSE in terms of recruitment and retention. And as opposed to addressing that issue of pay and terms and conditions and issues in CDNT and addressing recruitment and retention, you have chosen to remove a post. And I'm asking you here, Minister, and I'm pleading with you, to do not punish the children of South and West Mayo in relation to a loss of a post. Minister, there is a window of opportunity for these children. These children have been waiting over 3 years for speech and language therapy. Imagine, Minister, being the mother or father of one of these children, looking at children, rearing these children, and seeing milestones being missed. And that is the reality. The window of opportunity for these children is actually being missed on a weekly and a monthly basis. And it is devastating. It is devastating for these families. And they know the loss that this is going to have in terms of the removal of the vacant posts. And it is deeply wrong. And it's deeply wrong from politicians and the HSE and the Minister to suggest and spin this, a political spin, to say that this is a good and a positive thing. Minister, we need to protect the vacant post within the CDNT3 team in the West. There are almost 1,000 individuals waiting to be seen on the CDNT in our region. And Minister, I want to say very clearly that the vacant posts do not reflect an absence of need. They really do reflect the absence or the issues in terms of recruitment and retention. And the pay and numbers strategy within the HSE should not be used to punish the families of CDNT3, Louisburg, Westport, Ballinrobe, Kilmaine, Shrewell, Deneal. That is essentially what's happening. You are sacrificing this region because of the pay and numbers strategy. So I'm asking you, Minister, to please bring this back to Cabinet. I'm asking you to protect the vacant posts, to fill those vacant posts, to address pay terms and conditions, to launch launch what we have been calling for Operation Shamrock, to recruit and bring home our wonderful therapists across Australia and Canada. Bring them home. Let's fill these posts and let's protect our children. Let's make sure that our children do not miss these windows of opportunity, that they get the best start in life possible. And I'm asking a Minister to please be straight with the people of Mayo and protect these posts and protect the most vulnerable children in Mayo.
Deputy Nolan.
Minister, I'm delighted to speak on this motion tonight, which I will be fully supporting. I particularly support the call on Government to develop and introduce a cost of disability payment. We all know that the cost of living with a disability is significantly higher than for the non-disabled person. But there is also the emotional and the psychological costs that have to be borne. They are much more difficult to quantify and to put a number on, but they are no less real for that. I want to focus on one particular issue, however, and that is the ongoing issues around access to the primary medical certificate. Almost 2 years ago, the former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar committed to me here in this Dáil chamber that he would investigate issues relating to the difficulties faced by disabled persons in securing a primary medical certificate. And yet nothing of substance has changed since that time, which is concerning. The Primary Medical Certificate Scheme provides relief from vehicle registration tax and VAT, and is only open to severely and permanently disabled persons, such as a driver or passenger. To qualify for the relief, the applicant must hold a primary medical cert issued by the local HSE board or following an appeal with the Disabled Drivers Board. I have repeatedly highlighted this issue, and I have cited the case of Mr. Daigan, who contacted me. This was a man who lost part of his left arm when it had to be amputated after a traumatic motorcycle accident he was involved in 2019. This man also suffered several broken bones in his shoulder and a brain injury. But despite his difficulties and injuries, his application for a primary medical cert was repeatedly refused, which made absolutely no sense. It is my understanding that there are about 1,000 people affected by this issue. So while new payments dealing with the cost of disability are right and proper, we also need to focus on fixing the schemes that are already in place and that are supposed to help the disabled return to active employment, like the primary medical cert. And I would call for an urgent review in relation to that matter. Garth Magat.
Margaret. Lascian Corla, I want to thank Sinn Féin for bringing forward this motion, and I want to welcome the government not opposing it. All of us on the doors in our email inboxes, I've heard the same stories time and time again. It's a huge part of why I got involved in politics, and I think a lot of people here would resonate with this. The shocking cases of families left behind, the shocking cases of young children left behind, the shocking cases of adults being left behind by the system. People with disabilities are denied the support they deserve. That is why I do and have welcomed the $620 million increase in disability funding of this budget. It's a step forward, and I want to thank every colleague in the Regional Independents and all members of government who pushed for it. It is about making disabilities and carers a real priority, not an afterthought. But we need to make sure that this money that has been increased in the budget is spent well and it's spent efficiently. This isn't just about figures on a page, it's about giving families and carers the support they deserve. I heard other members, as I was in my office, speak about emails they have received, and I rang a certain constituent who I've been working with since when I entered politics as a councillor. And I'd also like to welcome to the chamber Kieran Delaney, my disability advisor, who has been working with me tirelessly on this case. Now, Minister, I know that this is your first year, and I know we have spoken in depth about this and you're in your ministerial role. And know that what I'm saying is not directed at you, it is directed at the current system, which I know you agree needs to be changed. Minister, for years, Saoirse Smith, a 34-year-old wheelchair user from Clontarf, who works full-time in the public sector,
has wanted what every citizen wants. She wants to work, she wants to contribute to our society, and she wants to live with dignity and respect. But from the day one of me meeting Saoirse, this is not the case. She's been struggling, and ever since going back to work, she feels like she's punished. Because she's in full-time employment, Saoirse has lost her full disability allowance and her mobility allowance. There was a recent article in the Irish Independent about this exact case, and she now fears that she's going to lose her medical card. When she gets married, and I've met her and her husband, she now thinks that she will be means tested as part of a couple. Her disability does not appear, and that she will go to work. She wants to now stop working. And Kieran knows this case. Kieran has been working with me on this case. But we shouldn't have to work on this case. This case shouldn't even be a case. People with disabilities shouldn't have to face the higher cost of living. They do. They face a way higher cost of living than most of us. And for medical needs, equipment, personal supports, they shouldn't fear losing those supports by going to work. Saoirse asked me to share these words when I was on the phone to her 30 minutes ago. This is supposed to be a happy time for me. Planning, but it is not. I'm worried about what I'm going to lose. People with disabilities and their families have been crying out for this for years, and they've been promised again and again. Well, people with disabilities can't live on these promises. They can't live on these broken promises. They need delivery. They need these promises to be delivered. And the strategy that was recently announced, I do welcome a lot of it, and I do welcome the fact that we did deal with a lot of DPROs. I've mentioned in this House how one or two of the DPROs that were engaged in this strategy cannot be classified as DPROs since the UN Convention. This is not what they are due to the enrolment process that they do have. Minister, Ireland has one of the lowest disability employment rates in Europe, and the gap remains among the widest. And this is why we must set and meet those binding targets. But unless every department in this agency is held to account, these targets are just going to remain words. I've seen this firsthand with my parliamentary assistant, Michael, who has a disability. And since entering this House, it was his first ever job. From day one, he has shown that difference of being included makes. He has never felt left down. He has never let his disability hold him back, and I have never been let down by him. I have a huge amount to thank him for. But when our office looked into the wage subsidy scheme to help with Michael's disability and the lack, when sometimes he does find it difficult, we were told that it does not apply to members of the Oireachtas. This is a missed opportunity. I've heard members from this side of the House and members on this side of the House talk about the wage subsidy scheme. I think it's very important that we look into bring it into the House of the Oireachtas, because it would bring people with disabilities to be working right with policymakers. I think it would make a huge difference. If we allowed members to access schemes like that, we'd have more people with disabilities who could work right here in Leinster House, giving their voice at the highest level and making the most possible that we can achieve for people with disabilities. Minister, I'm aware my time is running out. We need to be clear, measurable targets, and we need the deadlines for the waiting lists to be addressed. Minister, I heard Deputy Lawless talk about bringing back our talented therapists, and I spoke recently about this, how there is a huge waiting list with Curu when people qualify with a qualification in the UK, and how it needs to be fast-tracked. They shouldn't have to wait 18 months or 2 years. Minister, I completely support this motion.
Thank you,
and Gurr Magat. Thanks very much.
I want to thank Sinn Féin for bringing forward this very laudable motion before us here this evening, because what it reads is the cost of disability. We all know that any person that has a disability, it costs them more just to survive and to carry on. And I suppose they have a lot of issues, and people with serious disabilities, and for their carers, respite in Kerry is practically non-existent when it's needed. And residential care places for children with intellectual and physical disabilities. We're very short of those, Minister, and I can highlight one case where a person in serious need in their 30s of residential care was offered a place in County Meath, all the way from County Kerry up to County Meath. And that's absolutely ridiculous, Minister, and we're still short of respite beds in the southern side of the constituency. And you see, I had it all the summer. Carers and daughters and sons caring for their elderly people who have disabilities, and they just wanted to go on holidays for a week, and there was no place for respite in any of the district or community hospitals. They were all full. And people with a disability are entitled to 4 weeks of respite in a community hospital setting. But that doesn't materialise. It doesn't happen, Minister. In Kerry, it doesn't happen. And we have a wonderful place, Mary of the Angels in Beaufort in Kerry, that has, which was donated by the Doyle family many years ago, and that's been closed by stealth, because as the people die away there, that bed is never filled again. I can't understand this, Minister, and at the same time then we're offered that the only place is either Tipperary or Meath for someone that needs new residential care that appears new. They won't be left into Mary the Angels. I can't understand that, Minister, and I'm asking you to look at that. That grounds, there's 40 or 50 acres that could be expanded. You could have all kinds of different kind of respite there. It should be developed as a model for the rest of the country, because the room is there to do it, and the basics are there already. Swimming pools and all the different kind of things that are needed for people with disabilities. The one thing that hurts me very much, Minister, is when I see elderly people minding their elderly children. And I'm talking about people in their late 70s and early 80s. And the question they have for me, who's going to see after our Johnny when we're gone? We're in our last legs. And who's going to see after our Mary or Julia or whatever? I feel for those people, because they've done their best all their lives. And we should be giving them better assurance and reassurance that their children will be seen after. These children might be in their late 40s, early 50s, and it's a fierce worry to their parents. Home helps. Many people are allocated home help, but they're allocated the time, Chairman, but nobody turns up because we're told we don't have them. We don't have the home helps. And there are many instances where one goes and they can't operate the hoist on their own, and that's happening too much. And people have to stay in bed for an extra day. And you know, that's not right, because they seize up. And we'd all seize up if we stayed sitting down long enough now. We wouldn't move after a few days. But it's important to those people that they have a routine, and that they're seen after and got out of bed and put them sitting in a chair, or take them to the bathroom, or take them wherever they want to go. But too often it's not happening for these people in Kerry. And I'm asking you to listen to us, because those people with disabilities, they have a role to play. They're part of us, and we want to ensure that they're properly seen after. Thank you, Chairman and Minister. Thanks.
Deputy Harkin.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. First of all, can I thank the deputies for their contribution to this debate, and I am happy to take the closing statement on behalf of Minister Cleary. Can I first say that the Government is well aware of the additional costs faced by disabled people. And I re-echo Minister Cleary's statement, where he said that he is committed within the lifetime of this Government to addressing the cost of disability in both a comprehensive and a permanent way. Improving the position of disabled people and ensuring their full participation in Irish society is a priority for this Government, and that's why the programme for Government includes a range of commitments in this area, which we will advance over the lifetime of this Government. Now, in his opening remarks, the Minister spoke about our commitment to introducing an annual cost of disability support payment. This is incredibly important, but it is just one piece of the jigsaw. Both the programme for Government and the Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People include a whole range of commitments for disabled people. We have also committed to reforming the disability allowance payment and removing anomalies in the current means test for support. In fact, as you know, the Department of Social Protection is conducting a review of means testing generally across the schemes. Any reforms will be guided by the outcome of this review. The Government is committed to progressively, and that's an important point, progressively increasing weekly disability payments. We have been doing this, including in the recent budget, where we have increased the personal rates, increased for qualified adults and child support payments. Furthermore, on a practical note, and this is just for so many individuals have different individual stories when it comes round to their circumstances and experiences with disability. So, for example, medical assessments. It's really important that they're not, when we carry them out on people who have lifelong conditions, that it doesn't happen again and again. And the Department of Social Protection is examining the ability to work criteria for certain payments so that people are not subjected to the same requirements, as I said, time and time again. In regard to employment supports, the issues facing disabled people cut across government, and that's why the National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People is a key focus. It adopts a whole-of-government approach with individual government departments and state agencies responsible for planning and delivering commitments that come under their remit across 5 pillars, including employment. And speaking of a whole-of-government approach, in my own department, there is an extra £3 million available in the budget this year for students with disabilities. Now, coming back to employment, the Department of Social Protection is the joint lead on the employment pillar, together with the Department of Enterprise, Tourism and Employment. And in truth, many disabled people face barriers in the workplace when looking for employment. And government wants to address those barriers and ensure there is an intensive and appropriate activation measures and, crucially, employment supports in place to help those most distant from the labour market into work. The Department of Social Protection, through its nationwide network of Intrio centres, provides employment services for job seekers, including disabled people in particular. Employability offers specialist employment services to people with disabilities. They can help people find work through their job matching service and offer ongoing in-work support to employees and employers. There is now a designated disability employment personal advisor in each of the 62 Intrio offices. In July 2022, the Department of Social Protection launched Early Engagement, a scheme which proactively works with disabled people and helps them achieve their goals through the Department's employment and training supports. Of course, taking part is completely voluntary. In December 23, a new employment programme under the European Social Fund was announced. Workability, inclusive pathways to employment programme. And this aims to support up to 13,000 disabled people progress their training and employment ambitions through 57 local, regional and national organisations. And the programme runs from January 24 to December 28. The Department of Social Protection also provides funding for AHEADS, Get Ahead and Willing Able Mentoring Programme. Sorry for all of these titles, etc., but that's what they're called. But the whole idea is to help people with disabilities transition from education to work. And I know, having spoken to many people with disabilities, that that's an absolutely crucial issue for them. The Government is also committed to expanding and building on these successful programmes. The wage subsidy scheme was mentioned earlier. We have committed to reviewing that scheme. The recent budget has already provided for an expansion of the scheme and an increase in the payment rates. Secondary benefits are of crucial importance as well, and fear of losing secondary benefits can be a very significant concern for people when they are considering taking up or increasing their employment. And that's why it was really important that Budget 2026 introduced measures whereby recipients of disability allowance, blind pension will be able to retain their fuel allowance payment for up to 5 years after moving into employment. There are already arrangements in place for the retention of certain secondary benefits when a person moves off a disability payment, such as disability allowance or invalidity pension, into employment, where they can keep their eligibility for free travel for up to 5 years. And in addition, a person who has been in receipt of certain social welfare payments, such as disability allowance, for 12 consecutive months may retain their medical card for 3 years on moving into employment. Those are transition measures that are constantly called for and that people with disabilities ask for, that make that transition more reasonable and bearable for those people. So in relation to the work that we are doing in regard to cost of disability, it is important to remember we're not starting from a blank slate. We're building on supports already available and the improvements that have been made, especially in recent years. So I suppose, in conclusion, can I thank the deputies for bringing forward this motion. The government is not opposing this motion. We are committed to introducing an annual cost of disability support payment. We will do that over the lifetime of this government. As the Minister said in his opening remarks, the aim is to bring forward proposals in the first half of next year so that they will be available for consideration in the Budget 2027 process. I know that all of us in this House recognise the concerns raised by the people who live with the daily reality of disability. We all want to further enhance the supports available to them and empower them to live full and independent lives and to be able to access employment. And I mentioned, and I just want to reiterate it again, the transition payments that are there for them. We have done a lot to improve supports for disabled people, but we all recognise that a lot more needs to be done.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Pat Buckley.
Thank you, Look, I just want to say in the outset, thanks for the opportunity for speaking here. I want to congratulate my Sinn Féin colleagues here for bringing this motion through. Minister, I've watched this debate and I just want to start with a quote from a family. Just puts into the picture of reality what it is. My name is Shauna Dunn. I'm a full-time carer for my 2-year-old son Jack and a mother of a 4-year-old girl called Demi. Jack is currently awaiting an autism assessment and attends private therapy sessions. Sometimes people don't understand the reality of being a full-time carer. They might think I'm lazy or choosing not to work, but that's far from the truth. My days and nights are long, demanding and emotionally draining. There's very little time to rest or think about myself. Every bit of energy goes into making sure my son has what he needs, while also trying to give my daughter the love and attention she deserves. Financially, things are tight. My partner works full-time, but with only one income and the added cost of private therapy sessions, travel to appointments and specialist items for my son, it's difficult to stay on top of everything. The constant rising cost of living is crucifying families like ours. I face higher household bills because I'm at home full-time, and any unexpected expense can cause real stress. Going private for an autism assessment is out of the question financially. Now, Minister, we all know the cost of disability is not seen by the people unless it actually affects them. I have over 24,000 people in my constituency, East Cork, that have some form of disability, and the additional expenses they're faced are not and haven't been recognised by the government in the last budget. The average cost of having a disability is at least $12,000 a year, and that's not, unless you have severe limitations, you could be losing maybe 93% of your disposable income. In rural parts of my constituency, many disabled individuals are forced to pay for taxis to get to attend hospital appointments, and if that wasn't bad enough, they have to pay for parking at the hospitals. Cork University Hospital, who received an income of over $2.3 million last year in car parking charges. I mean, we've already called for that to be abolished. But I mean, affordable and accessible housing in rural areas is extremely limited. And the other side of it is, what I want to say is the grants are totally inadequate, but it's the government's attitude to families, workers, people with disabilities having been consistently out of touch and has made having a disability and being poor go hand in hand. Now that says a lot, goes hand in hand. I wish I had more time to speak on this, but I'll just mention one thing. Fraser syndrome, check it out. It's an absolute disgrace what they're doing to people in this country.
Thank you, Deputy Buckley. Deputy Gould.
Yeah, Minister, you and your government are failing people with disabilities. The budget that you announced last week, first you did nothing. It actually made people with disabilities worse off. Your own report that you produced, I think it was 2021, outlined that people with disabilities, it costs more for them to live because of the extra things they need. Anywhere between 10 and 12,000 euros. What have you done to help them? And the Minister, you listed out a lot of things there about what you're doing. Come down to my constituency and I'll bring you around people with disabilities, how they're living, how they're struggling. You know what I mean? Like, you talk about what you're doing. Do you not know how people are suffering, how they're struggling? I have a very good friend of mine, Eddie Hennessy. At 33, he got a massive stroke. Right? He's led an unbelievable fight back now. You see the way he is now, you still have a lot of issues. He went away and set up his own photography company, and he turned out to be brilliant. And he was out the door for a couple of years with people trying to book him. But because there was no support for disabled entrepreneurs, he presented in the disabled committee in the Dáil here, I think 2 years ago. I know you're a great bit of stuff, Eddie. Well done. Well, Eddie's business though is gone. And the reason it's gone is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and ye independents never supported Eddie, and you're still not supporting Eddie. But it's not just Eddie. It's any disabled person out there who wants to become an entrepreneur, who wants to make a difference, who wants to stand on their own 2 feet, and all they're looking for is a little bit of help. Minister, are you parents whose children have no school? We're in October. How is that possible in this day and age of 2025 that the children, we cherish all the children equally, and all the bollocks, God forgive me. They have no school. They have no school, and you're coming in here with your big long list of what you're doing for them. I'm going to send you there. I'm going to send you personally the 3V tomorrow. These children's names, and I look for you to come back, tell me where and when they're going to have a school.
Deputy Gould, Deputy Newberhallig.
Margaret. Disabled constituents of mine feel absolutely forgotten about in this budget. They are not angered anymore. They're absolutely heartbroken. A ríis agus a ríis eile tá an taoiseachas an tánaiste hééis saisibh sa seomar seo agus an dala maló a chur ar glíní a bhfuil míchumis orthú. Duine siad don phobal go raibh cuasaí míchumis mar tusaíocht dómh sa bhúséid fiche sé, ach ag deire an lei, déanach darmid orthú agus hep ar an rialtas an chustas a bhaineann le míchumis a ahint. The government knows how much it is to cost, or how much it is to live with a disability. Sorry, how much it costs. They've known for 5 years and they've done nothing. 5 years ago it cost over 10 grand, so no doubt it's much more expensive today. And what have they done? They've chosen to make disabled people worse off by €1,400 this year. Another cold and callous slap in the face to the most vulnerable people in our society. People who face great added difficulty going about their daily lives because of biomedical conditions. People dealing with stigma and the emotional pain of living in a world that is not built to accommodate them. What we are calling for is not even to compensate for that latter difficulty, but for the material burden that falls on disabled people through no fault of their own to be recognised and provided for. What's the point of a social safety net if not to support people who are not in a position to provide for themselves entirely? The state certainly doesn't empower people with disabilities to provide for themselves in the workforce. We have the worst standing in the entirety of the EU in terms of disability employment, according to the DFI. So, in essence, we've created a poverty trap, with disability allowance and medical cards taken away once a disabled person enters employment, despite facing huge costs relative to the able-bodied population. Mary, a constituent of mine living with MS, told me, disabled people aren't looking for money for treats. They're looking for good quality shoes to help with walking, help with physio and acupuncture bills for pain management, diesel and car parking for regular medical appointments, ruddy banúsacha, simple basic necessities for a decent quality of life, things that families with disabilities simply can't afford. Surely you must all feel utter shame for breaking promises to disabled people.
Deputy O'Reilly. I want to thank everyone who made a contribution to the debate this evening. I think, Minister, you will agree the depth of feeling is very much evident here in the Chamber. The cost of living crisis cuts deeper and it lasts longer for people with disabilities, and the Government know this. This motion sets out an alternative to your Government's approach. The least we should expect from any decent government is that they won't make things worse for disabled people, and yet under your budget they will be worse off by up to €1,400. I urge you, Ministers, to listen to the voices of our disabled citizens and to act in their interests, to recognise the actual cost of being and living as a disabled person in this state. When disabled people turn 66 or they get a job, their primary condition and the costs associated with it don't disappear. It's still expensive. They still face additional costs. They aren't disabled by themselves. They are disabled by society. They are disabled by infrastructure that doesn't suit their needs. They're disabled by a payment structure from your department that will see them worse off this year. They're disabled by a government that neither listens nor understands what they need. I want to just talk to you very, very briefly, there's only a few seconds left, about a constituent of mine. His name is Paul. It's not Paul, but I'll call him Paul. Paul is visually impaired. He is legally blind. He lost all of his disability payments at the age of 66. Now, Minister, he got plenty of presents when he turned 66. He did not get the gift of sight, so he still was disabled when he was 65 and 364 days, and he woke up the next morning, happy birthday, you are now worse off. So it's failing to understand the cliff edge that people with disabilities face. It's failing even to see that you, on the government benches, have the power to make their lives better. Every budget is about choices. Every decision you make is a political choice. And in this budget, you chose to leave people with disabilities worse off. And that is why we put forward this motion. And I welcome the fact that you're not opposing it. But it would be better, and the people in the gallery know it, it would be better if you supported it and supported them.